Hello, everybody. Tony East here. I cover the Indiana Fever for the Next. I'm in Oklahoma City for the NBA Finals, which means I missed going to Fever Sky, but I did watch it. And the Fever are 8 games in, and I haven't had time to really sit down and just talk about my own thoughts about the team, right? In coverage, I don't get to opine very much, but I wanted to kind of talk about where this team is through 8 games, some of the challenges of evaluation, where this could be going, all sorts of things early in the season. And for those of you who've been asking for a Fever podcast, stay tuned. There could and probably will be one coming from me in the not-so-distant future. But let's begin here looking at this. They're 4-4 right now. They just beat the Sky for the second time last night with a masterclass defensive performance. And before we run into like a lot of stats and a lot of stuff that you could say about where the team is, my thoughts on what they're doing well and poorly, it's a very hard to evaluate 4-4 team because, as everybody well knows by now, they had 2 extremely close losses and a close win, right? Their dream win came up late. They've had 2 close wins, really. But the close losses by 1 possession, like coming down to the wire like that, like they're this close to a much, much, much better record than what they really have. And so that's part one of what makes it hard to evaluate where they are is like, they're 4-4, but they're not that far off from 6-2, 7-1, 5-3, whatever you want to say. You think the ball could bounce differently in many games, but that Liberty game in Indy was so close. The Dream game in Indy was so close. Their loss in DC, their first game without Clark, due to her injury, they were like right in it with 7 minutes to go. Obviously, they lost by 2 to the Sun. Like the ball bounce is just this close to them having a much different record than what they currently do. All 4 of their losses somewhat tight. I think in DC they got a little bit handled in that game, but all the rest, they had to really storm back against the Sun, obviously, but they were tied and winning that one late. Like it's all so close to their record being a poor representation of where they are, which is why it's hard to evaluate them in general, because I am generally a take the total package, not the results kind of guy. What I mean by that is if you just sort by net rating right now, they have the 3rd best net rating in the league, and it's not really close, right? New York Liberty, 8-0, first at a plus 23.3 net rating. Minnesota Lynx, second at a plus 12.6 net rating. Indiana Fever, 4-4, third at a plus 10.8. The 4th best team's plus 3.4, right? It's so tough to really dive in and see what the Fever are because of how many close games that they've had, really influencing those things. We're on like a per possession basis. And obviously a little bit of that even is influenced by the fact that they completely thumped the Sky twice. But still, their net rating suggests that they're much better than having the 6th best record in the league. So it's hard to evaluate them just based on the results. I don't think that's a fair way of looking at what the Fever have done, which is why it's important to look at what has gone well, what has not gone well. The other challenge of evaluation is their most recent game, obviously. Austin Kelly was the head coach. Stephanie White out for personal reasons. I'm in OKC for the finals. Lisa Salters, her wife, is not here, right, for game 2 after being on the broadcast for game 1. So I think it's fair to say a family thing going on there. I will not speculate at all what it is. I hope the best for the family and what's going on there. Congrats to Austin Kelly, obviously on his first win. They played a great game, great defensive game in Chicago, but, how much different would that have been with a different head coach? They've played half of their games without Caitlin Clark. That's the other part of this that's hard to evaluate is I spent so much of the offseason trying to figure out by asking questions, by evaluating their signings, all sorts of directional things, actions that we can take, right, and say, what does this team want to be? Right, they have a new front office, they have a new head coach. What do they want to play like? How much different than the Christie Sides Fever do they hope to be this year? And there's some obvious things you can look at and figure that out, but they bring in a Cunningham, they bring in a Bonner, they bring in a Howard. They, everybody they brought in, besides their finals/championship experience, either could guard historically, could shoot historically, or could play with tempo historically, right? And so the hope to me for the Fever was that they were building a team that would be paced and spaced and guard just well enough to get enough stops to score like crazy. Right? Their offense, I've been a little sick for about a week. Their offense was terrific last season, right? If you build on that by getting just a smidge more stops every game and adding just a little bit of spacing around an MVP candidate, lo and behold, you're rolling, right? So I got where they were going with that. It made sense why they kept shooters in the expansion draft. Okay, that's tick 1 that this is where they're headed. Obviously, Temi Fagbenle can play with speed. Regardless, We're past that point. They added Cunningham could shoot. Howard can play with pace. Bonner can kind of do everything that I've described. Right, you could bring this on down to anybody. Even Michaela Timpson at Florida State could move. I'm not even getting into the Colsons of the world, the Turners of the world, but like everybody could. And so at this stage, their offense is fourth. I think they'll hope that ticks up. The top two are probably going to end up being their competition for the best offenses this year. I bet New York finishes one, but they can catch Minnesota. They can catch Atlanta. Atlanta is very impressive this season to me. But regardless, I think the Fever's offense could end up being as high as second, right? That would fit the identity that they've hoped to build. However, I'm very on their offense so far. We'll get to that in a second. Their defense is second. This is now 1/4 of their games have come against the Sky, who have just been dreadful on offense. They're the third worst offensive team this year. They played the worst offensive team in Connecticut, but caught them on a good night, actually. So I don't know if the Fever are going to end the season as the second best defense, but if you wanted to just like totally sum up the Fever to this point, I actually think their offense has been a tick worse than I thought it could be, and their defense has been a little bit better than I thought it could be. And on balance, that's led to a product that is kind of easy to see where this is going. So I've just kind of summed up generally where I think this team is at. Aaliyah Boston's been awesome this year. I think she's been a big part of their defense being very successful. Bonner's added some defensive pop. And when they have one of Holler Cunningham on the floor, and Sophie Cunningham's injury should not be thrown to the side when looking at their absences that have led to some losses, right? They might have won that Connecticut game that she got hurt in if she was able to finish that game, for example, right? So I keep just rambling. Their defense, I think, is going to finish better than I thought this season. I thought they'd be about the middle of the pack. I think basically everyone's 7 and down. Maybe Las Vegas gets better on defense this year, but they'll finish better then, and they should finish with a better defense than the Valkyries, who have also impressed me a little bit this season, given who they have available. So good defensive start for the Fever. I think that is a takeaway that people should be able to lean into, even though when their schedule ramps up, we'll see how much this actually holds, right? The Liberty and the Dream were able to score at a pretty good level against this team. I think we'll see a lot more like upcoming games. The Fever will see them play the Liberty again. They play the Dream again just this week. They play the Aces right after that. They'll play the Storm right after that. They play some better offensive teams fairly soon, right? If they can have a good defensive game against one of those teams, I think that would really cement this in my head. But it seems like while there are stretches where I think, man, like their defense is a little too lost in the sauce right now, they're generally pretty connected on that end of the floor, and that's where I think you've seen the veterans of the Fever add the most to the team. So they still have work to do on that end, just like every team with half the roster being new does. But that has been, I think, a welcome, not surprise internally. I think they thought they'd be a better defensive team, right? Stephanie White talks about her 3 A's on the defensive floor, active awareness, and I forget the third one. I wrote it in a story. They've been better on the defensive end, right? And I think that's a good start for them. That will lead to better transition chances when they're more connected offensively. But that's the other part of this, is the offense has not been quite as good as I thought it would be. And I think it will pick up. They have the talent for it to be better. Clark hasn't hit quite the percentage of shots that everybody knows she can. And she's obviously missed time, right? That obviously impacts their offensive numbers. But they have a lot of plays where, they start their action, right? Whatever it is. Just calling it a generic pick and roll thing would be too lazy. But they start their first action with 3 or 4 players doing their thing, moving, blah, blah, blah. They flow through it. Like a decent shot comes from it. They don't take it. Then when they reset, it feels like they're dead right there on the spot, right? Their second and third things they want to flow into, whether it's a second thing, like another just run a pick and roll with 2 good players, or pitch it, get a big involved, whatever. That is where they seem to die. Is their first 12 seconds of their offense seems pretty good, and then the last 12 seconds of their offense seems pretty rough. And so they get deep into the clock a lot and are forced to burp something up. That's where I think I would like to see more from this Fever team, is keeping up their offensive system, because a lot of people have talked about, right, their pace numbers are really high, but it doesn't feel that way watching them because their transition numbers haven't been that good. They're still 5th in pace, even missing Clark for half their games. They were 1st in pace when Clark went down, right? So I'll be very curious how they can kind of settle in there, right? Can they find a way to keep their offense flowing when their initial actions die down, or when they're the player they hoped would be open from an action, or the options, plural, that they hoped would open up from an action would be there. One of my biggest gripes with fans of teams is they always say, call a play for a specific player. That's not how basketball actions work. Almost everything a team does is designed to have multiple things be available within that play. And so I think the Fever do a good job with some of those first actions, especially when Clark's available. It makes a defense has to panic a lot more about choosing what to defend. But once that dies down, and once they don't get what they want from that, That's where I have questions about what they're doing. So I don't know if their offense can get quite to the top of the league this year, but I think it'll settle in second, third-ish as things progress. But I think their defense will end up a little bit better than I thought. Could end up in the top half, certainly. They've been in the bottom 2 in defensive rating for years. I've covered the Fever since 2020. They've always been bad on defense. So a welcome sight to see them be very competent on that end, adding veterans. And Aaliyah Boston having a wonderful start to the season has done wonders for them, I think, on that end of the floor. So interesting start. 4-4, a poor reflection, I think, of how well they've been playing to start the season. And I'm looking forward to watching more of their games starting on Tuesday. I'll be able to finally dive in more and watch them with a sharper eye once the Pacers are done playing, which usually there's no overlap. That's been a part of my issue, creating as many videos or talking about the team or writing about the team as much as usual, as they almost they've never in my time really overlapped for more than a couple of weeks. It's 2 months now of overlap between Pacers and Fever, which is great for the Pacers, obviously. It's just my own personal time to really dive into this stuff has been limited. Last thing I want to get to, Arie McDonald added on a Hardship this week, has played quite well, right? I think her pace ad has been good. She can put more pressure on her defense than Sydney Colson, who's more of a table setter defensive type. They're just different. I don't know that one's necessarily better than the other. The way the Fever play makes McDonald look quite good. Her ball pressure and defense has been really good. They're 2-0 since they added her on a Hardship. Some confusion over the way this goes. I covered a Hardship before in Crystal Dangerfield a few years ago, and I think 2022. The Fever had some players overseas. This was pre-prioritization rules. Danielle Robinson was not yet with the team, and I can't remember who the other player was, but they only could have Crystal Dangerfield until those players returned. Then Dangerfield left, and they had to wait to get her back until that was cleared. I've seen a lot of fans say that the Fever could just cut someone else and then just keep Arie. That's not true. Once Clark or Cunningham returns, which could happen as soon as Tuesday's game, we'll see. When we were at Pacers practice earlier this week, Clark was running in the background in the exercise equipment there. So that's the first time I'd seen her running, for example. And she's obviously, you've all seen a million videos of her shooting. She's talked now that you can find that interview on this channel. We'll see when she returns. I'm over-explaining this. Once her Cunningham return, whether that's Tuesday or their next game after that, which I believe is their Liberty game over the weekend, so that's another 4 days. Keep that in mind when you think about returns. Then they have to let McDonald go. I think it's 10 days post-Hardship, and then after that, once she's available, and remember, people keep saying someone else will inevitably scoop her up. Well, anyone could have done that before the season, right? So it's not like teams are all like, oh my gosh, we could have had her. Like, yeah, she's played well, but I don't know if anyone's opinion has changed so much. I don't think it's like inevitable that someone would pick her up. Then they could, in theory, waive somebody to bring her in if they wanted to. She is chewing into their cap space right now. So later in the season, re-signing players will be just a different matter because of this, but they need her, and they got 2 wins, right? That is the most valuable thing you could possibly spend your money on. So that's a problem to deal with later, but I've seen some confusion. She has to be the one who goes when one of those other 2 players comes back. That's my early season Fever thoughts and clearing up some confusion I've seen from fans. I can dive way more into the team very soon. Podcast coming every week about this team very soon. Thank you guys for watching this one. You can find all my work covering the Fever at the Next. I'll post some links in the comments for that. See you guys very soon. Thanks for listening.